Hi, everybody. This is the first seminar for T9 Hacks for Earth Protection and Sustainable Development. T9 Hacks is happening March 19 to March 21st. And here we have the amazing Shaz Zamore. And now I will let you take the floor.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks for having me here. I'm really, really excited to be here. I was fortunate enough to be a judge at last year's T9 Hack, so I'm happy to bring some knowledge to you guys this evening. All right, so I'm just going to refresh this. So we're going to be talking about Earth stewardship, how it can be better to our planet, especially as designers, as technological users. And I find that this graphic, I hope it's large enough for you guys all to see, does a really great job of just visualizing how much we consume and therefore how much we waste. And it's pretty remarkable how much of an impact you can have on the planet just by monitoring these two things, how much you consume and how much you waste. So I'm going to be talking about what we do as people, where the kind of problems are. We're going to get into a little bit about climate change, what it actually is, how it's actually causing the effects that we're seeing already and the effects that we expect to see. And then we'll talk about how we as creators, as builders, as thinkers can do quite a bit of good to counteract that. So I like the stray bottles that just go flying off. Anyways, let me switch this over. All right, so let's just jump in and get to chatting about the planet. I'm Dr. Z. I also go by Shaz in some circles. And I'm really excited to talk about Earth protection and sustainable development. And so just to get started and just to fill you in on what my background is and why I'm talking about this in the first place, I like to answer the question of how does Earth stewardship show up in our lives. So I'm going to give examples, and I welcome you guys to think about this question for yourself. But I'll give you some examples of how it shows up in mine and has for a really long time. My mom likes to call me a tree-hugging hippie, so just to give you a sense of where we're coming from. So in undergrad, I actually studied 2 foci in biology. I was really absorbed in ecology and evolutionary biology. So I was taking all of the required courses for that, along with all of the required courses for neuroscience. And this has given me this cool perspective of seeing how things evolve and change. So just kind of talking about where Earth stewardship shows up. I've been active in a whole bunch of different kind of environmental spheres, participating in the March for Science and things like that. And because I teach about a lot of sustainability and environmental injustice and environmental justice, I also consume a lot of this content. So I read quite a bit about it. And like I said, I teach. So before we dive too far into this, I'd like to invite you all to take a quiz. So if you guys could share that link. So it's a short quiz. It's about 9 questions long. And feel free to, I'll give us a few minutes here to just take that. But it's a really good way. I just want to get a sense of what you guys do in terms of how you consume and also how you dispose of the things you no longer need. So most of the trash is hard to recycle plastic, which is really common, like single-use plastics or styrofoam. You guys are doing a great job rinsing your recyclables. That's really great. Getting rid of clothes. It's equal between throwing them in the trash and taking them to a disposal center. And then let's hop down and talk about a couple of the tech stuff, because that's why we're here. And so it looks like when you need a new device, like an Arduino or maybe a Raspberry Pi or something like that, a lot of you guys look online and then looking at maker spaces. Let's see, what else have you guys said here? Not too many upgrades on the phone every 2 years, every 4 years. Most of you guys do longer than that or haven't upgraded your phones, which is pretty cool to see. And then How often do you guys place orders with Amazon? It seems like it's pretty rare among this crowd, which is cool. We'll talk about all of these things as we go through our little chat here. So let me hop back to sharing my screen and we'll continue on. Okay, so I'm splitting this up into two sections here. So first I'm going to talk about Earth protection and why the Earth needs protecting. And I'm primarily going to talk about climate change, which is something we all talk about, but I don't know how often we sit down and learn about the actual impacts, measurable impacts that climate change has going on. Oh, all right, hooray, awesome. Okay, so we're all familiar with the greenhouse effect. Our Earth has an atmosphere. The sun warms the surface of the Earth, particularly the ocean and any bare patches of land that aren't things like snow. And then that heat will kind of move up and kind of stay in the atmosphere. And what propels this phenomenon are things called greenhouse gases, which are water vapor, which we are never going to get rid of, methane, carbon dioxide, and nitrous oxide. So these gaseous elements will absorb the heat and then emit it in all different directions, including downward. And so this is what makes our planet habitable. It's really important that we have these greenhouse gases. But of course, we're making more greenhouse gases than what naturally occurs, or disrupting the natural cycles of carbon dioxide cycling, for example. And that is leading to more and more efficient heat trapping in our atmosphere, especially in the lower atmosphere where we all live. So we've been producing a lot of greenhouse gases. And what's interesting is we talk so much about carbon dioxide, but we make far more methane as a pretty steady constant. And so we produce a lot of these greenhouse gases and have done so in an increasing fashion, really aggressively from the 70s, but starting, of course, from the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s. And so we can break down where we produce these greenhouse gases, and this is just looking at the United States. And so we see most of our greenhouse gases comes from transportation, which is cars, trucks, ships, and trains. We get a little bit that's coming from agriculture. This is livestock, soil treatment, and rice production. Rice growth is actually a really big contributor of greenhouse gases. When it comes to commercial and residential, this is really how you and I use and consume a lot of greenhouse gas products and events, right? And so a lot of it comes from heating our homes with fossil fuels and cooking our food with fossil fuels, using products that produce greenhouse gases, and waste management. So how we ship our waste around, how we move our waste around, and how we break down our waste. So all of those things are actually contributing to greenhouse gases as well. When we talk about industry, which is a major component, we're really primarily talking about the cost or the burning of fossil fuels to produce raw materials. So these are things like making plywood, for example, will take a certain amount of greenhouse gas. So producing the things that we use to build, let alone production, are going to be contributing. And then also electricity. So this is really looking at our electricity providers. So a lot of our providers, especially in Colorado, we have a lot of coal-based energy sources. And so this is another big area of production of greenhouse gases. But what's interesting in looking at this is that the majority of the greenhouse gas sources are factors that you and I can directly influence, which means it's not this intangible problem. This is something that we can actually do by adjusting our behaviors. And I'll talk about what those behaviors can be. All right, another thing that's great to focus on, I try to balance as much as I can the difficult things with the positive things, is that how we use our land actually helps us sequester these gases. So we basically eliminate roughly 12% of the greenhouse gases that we produce by things like national parks and restorative lands, right? So if we were to stop producing these exorbitant greenhouse gases, right now, today, over time, the planet will naturally sequester these things. It will lock it into the soil, it will lock it into the ocean floor. And so this happens in two ways. So we hear a lot about trees and how they consume carbon dioxide, for example. But the ocean is also a really great natural sequester of primarily carbon dioxide, but it will also sequester methane as well. So we have some things that are working on our side. So when we think about the problem, we should think about the things that are beneficial here and how we can exploit that. So if we look at what this is doing, right? So now we're seeing this, we have this increase in temperature that's happened really since the 70s. And if you look at this graph on the right, we're looking at the average temperature over time. And this is just measured by a couple of different places. And then we're looking at the decade average of surface temperatures, right? So this is land surface temperatures. And you can see that we're on this trend. There's no real surprise there. But what's interesting is that as this is warming, we're causing these really unexpected and hard to predict impacts on far-reaching corners of the planet. So the Arctic, even though our surface air has only increased by 1 degree Celsius, the Arctic air has warmed about twice as much. And part of this is because as everything is warming up, we're losing a lot of this very reflective ice and snow mass, and we're getting exposure of this dark, heat-absorbing water and ground, right? We're seeing the soil now. And so what this does is it accelerates the heating process locally, and this will disrupt the polar vortex, which is what keeps the Arctic very, very, very cold. It's a very systematic jet stream. And when you break down this polar vortex, it leads to this polar jet stream, which we just experienced last week. So those very, very, very cold spells that we keep getting more and more, it happens earlier in the season, although there is a natural tendency for it to happen. It's happening earlier and earlier, longer and longer, and going further and further south. All of that is happening because we're heating up our Arctic so much that it disrupts this stabilizing polar vortex and produces more of this polar jet stream, which comes down, sends that Arctic air further south. And so the result is we get these very extreme cold winters, which is very hard to explain, right? It's a conundrum, and it's why we changed the language from global warming to climate change, because as we notice the impacts of this heating that's happening, we're realizing that there's all these complex waves of effects that are happening that don't necessarily mean that things get warmer, but things are going to get more erratic and more difficult to predict. So colder winters are actually a symptom of climate change. So as we're talking about heating up the Arctic and heating up the surface temperature, surface air, we're also heating up the ocean surface temperatures, which are dictating a lot of these jet streams that we need to survive. Jet streams and ocean temperatures are what keep things like Europe habitable, right? We get this warm air that comes off the coast of Africa that makes all of that habitable. We stand to disrupt that somewhat and cause a lot of other problems along the way as we continue to add these greenhouse gases and heat everything up. So ocean surface temperatures have increased a little bit less than land temperatures. And marine heat waves that last 2 years are now 53 times more common. And it's 7 times more common to have a marine heat wave that lasts all year long. And so when we heat up the entire ocean, which is a staggering volume, we end up disrupting this cycle of CO2 sequestration that typically helps us out. So every year, the ocean sequesters on its own, with nobody helping it, about 2 billion tons of carbon dioxide. That's a great offset. It's amazing. But what happens is as we heat up this the water, we're affecting our deep water circulation, which affects our upwelling, which ultimately results in the production of CO2 from the ocean. So we get this negative feedback. The more we heat up the earth, the more we produce more CO2, the more the ocean is going to release more CO2 and heat up the earth, etc. So we really have a responsibility to do what we can to sequester and stop the production of carbon dioxide. I know we know the reason that we should, but I'm not so sure that we understand the reason why. We're starting these positive feedback loops. It just keeps making it worse and worse and worse. And so as we see these changes, and it happens globally, and we're seeing these very broad sweeping changes, we have to realize that we as humans are a part of this as well. And so we're going to see how climate change impacts society. And unfortunately, the people who are the least contributors to climate change are going to be most severely impacted by climate change. So let's look at what happens socially, what happens to people as we increase or continue our production of greenhouse gases in each of these sectors, starting with agriculture. So the more we rely on agriculture, the more we sustain the way that we are producing or going about our agriculture proceedings, we're going to see an increase or consistency in waste and pesticide exposure, which is going to affect immigrant workers, farmers, people who are close to the products themselves, our produce. And we're going to see waste and pesticide in runoff and just what gets distributed through the air. That's going to affect low-income populations because these large-scale agricultural systems that we tend to put in place generally are placed in low-income areas. So all of these impacts that come about from us consuming are going to disproportionately affect the people who have no other option but to live near these locations. And then the people who are working and providing our food, by the way, side tip, strongly recommend checking out the hashtag #WeFeedYou. It's a really great way to see just what goes into getting the food from the farm to your table. It's a really great way to see the people who are involved. So these get more and more dangerous. So think about this polar vortex that happened last week. We still have produce that's coming in. A lot of our produce is picked by hand. The strawberries that you enjoy off season, all of the vegetables that you enjoy off season, a lot of them are in these places where they are managed by hand, picked not by a machine, not in a greenhouse. And so all of those people are still outside working and collecting and harvesting because the demand is always going to be there. There's never really a break. So as we get more and more erratic environmental conditions, we're making it harder and harder for people to provide us food to eat. And then finally, I don't know if you saw this, there was a study that just came out, I think today, I just saw the headline, that the more we use land for agriculture and the more we disrupt natural habitats, the more likely we're going to get outbreaks because we're going to expose ourselves, first of all, to more and more rare microbiota. And then we're also going to disrupt the sort of natural balance that minimizes disease and minimizes parasites. So we're going to see more and more impacts in that perspective as well. With transportation, we love cars. America loves cars. we gave up all of our rail systems for highways. And the more we are dependent on cars, the more this is going to lean the demand and therefore the regulation and the political assignment to allow more car use over public transit. Right? We're seeing it already, and it's just going to continue to aggravate and go on that trend. And then all of these highways that we put in and the expansion of these highways are going to again affect the people. Where is the cheap housing, right? Where is the affordable housing? It's almost always near a highway. So the more we are contingent and dependent on, not contingent, but the more we are dependent on car use, the more we are leaning into these problems that disproportionately affect the low income portions of our society. With electricity, pretty plain and simple, fossil fuel and waste pollution from converting that fossil fuel. Again, all of these sites where we put our coal manufacturing sites, where we put our nuclear sites, tend to be near these low income areas. So the more that this kind of leans on these very wasteful means of producing energy, the more we're going to continue and aggravate these effects, disproportionate effects on people. And this image I'm showing here is a portion, actually I'm curious to know if anyone knows what this is. I'm going to chat a little bit. If you know what I'm showing, feel free to drop it in the chat if you know what that is. But I'll keep chatting while you guys squint and figure it out. So in the commercial and residential portion, this is really how we use our resources. So again, we're not really seeing an even distribution of resources. So this means as we're expanding our use, we're expanding the demand on broadband, on fiber optics. It's not going to be distributed evenly. It's going to be distributed so that we still will see these disparities in who can access the internet, who can access all sorts of kind of infrastructure that helps us communicate in a modern world. And then land waste and landfill sites are also have a tendency of popping up near low income areas. And so this image here on the right, yeah, Mark got it. This is in Louisiana. This is Cancer Alley. So this is a place, I forget what the rates are, but staggering rates of cancer, because there's just a huge area where there's refining that happens. You could actually see in this image down here, these are all houses. And then literally there's like a little strip of land that's supposed to do something. And then there's all of these refineries. So this is not uncommon in a lot of places in this country in particular. And then when it comes to industry, we're mining a lot of rare earth elements, which I'm going to talk about in detail in a moment, which puts lives in danger. It was a huge, huge, huge ecological disruption. And then the waste that we produce, especially our e-waste, actually puts a lot of lives in danger. And I'll talk about what that is in more specifics shortly. So this climate inequality is really a problem where the least responsible people for climate change are going to suffer the worst consequences. And if we look at the prediction on this this map here, we're seeing the prediction for economic damage as a result of climate change. So these darker, warmer colors are going to be the higher damage. And a lot of it happens in the South, where we see the vast proportion of our low income population. That's the people who are more likely to live below the poverty line. And so here's a map of that poverty line, or the poverty distribution in the US, where darker colors indicate a larger portion of the population that is below the poverty line, which I believe is $23,000 a year as an income. And if you kind of fade these out and hold them over each other as best you can, you could just see that there's this really tight correlation between the places that are going to be economically impacted and the places that are already economically struggling. Right? So the more we cause this climate change, the more we're going to put these people into a harsher and harsher situation. And then finally, if we look at this globally, we're looking here at emissions based on trade. So what are the dirtiest paths of trade, right? What are the most productive ones in terms of greenhouse gases? And so we see that China, the world economy really relies on China to provide a whole lot of things from them. And I'm curious to know what you think, and this is true for all of these larger arrows, but what do you guys think is most likely getting exported that's creating this huge demand? Why is China such a provider? Clothes, sure, yeah, there's a lot of clothes. What's one thing that you absolutely can't live without? Yeah, there we go, electronics, but not just electronics. We're talking about rare earth minerals. So rare earth minerals, or rare earth elements, really refer to a collection of elements that exist as far as we know. So all of these that are in orange, or this darker color here, are all rare earth elements. And we use them in a large number of ways for pretty much every single electronic item you can imagine. So here's where we use, in the United States, here's where we use rare earth elements. We primarily use them for combustive things, to help motors run, right? It's a vast majority of where we put our rare earth elements. We also see them in batteries, so lithium, nickel, both of those types of batteries. So nickel are non-rechargeable batteries, lithium are rechargeable batteries. They both use rare earth elements. When we think about our clean energy, which is a conundrum, we'll talk about some cool stuff that's happening there. Whenever we make our wind turbines, our solar panels, especially, These are anytime there's a magnet, we're using rare earth elements. Anytime you have a vibrating motor in your phone, in your pagers, if you still have them, in your gadgets, you're using a rare earth element, right? So it goes into a very, very, very broad range of materials. And it's not easy to get, right? So we have, there's two ways that we can collect rare earth elements from the ground. And first is something called open cast mining, which, as you can see, if you look on around here, this is like a track. Those are tire tracks, just to give you a sense of scale. So they excavated this whole area. So it's a gigantic ecological disturbance. It pulls up all of these awful toxins and metals out of the earth and puts it into groundwater. It's really, really, really huge ecological impact just to get the things that we need to distract us all day. The alternative is to do something called deep mining, where you're not really clearing out as much space. You're not destroying as much ecologically, but you are then putting a huge tax on human lives. So you're making smaller mine shafts, you're using smaller areas, which means that you're relying more on human labor. And so in the DRC in particular, as well as in China, these are incredibly dangerous jobs where you're exposed to hard metals. There's a high incidence of cancer, there's a high death rate. And it gets really ugly when you talk about local politics that go in. These are not fair trade. These are not unionized workers. We get into a lot of criminal behavior in terms of how we actually use people to get these resources. So it's a very, very serious and dramatic problem. And what's scary, truly scary, is how broadly this is happening all over the world. So this map is showing all of the sites where we are actively and either continuously mining or expanding our mining behaviors. And it happens really all over the world. The ones that are in the United States, of course, we have much better or much tighter, I should say, regulations for how we treat people who are working in the mining industry. So it's slightly better. And we have EPA restrictions, so it's slightly better, but we cannot make that assurance around the world, especially when we have these really strong demands and the expectation of getting it for the prices that we have gotten it for, right? So we have gotten things cheaply and we expect to still get things cheaply, even though we need to make revisions as to how we treat people and access these resources. So mining is destroying these huge swaths of land. It's putting people in danger. In a lot of countries, especially in China and the DRC in particular, there's human trafficking, there's child labor. We see a lot of really inhumane behaviors that are happening just to meet these demands of getting our rare earth elements for our precious electronics. It has been the cause of a civil war in the Democratic Republic of Congo. So it's really not something not trivial at all. And I saw this and it really stuck with me. And I hope that this sticks with you too, that there's no such thing as a fair trade phone. Every single phone that is produced, that is sold, that is stolen, shared, what have you, whatever happens to that phone, it came from a place that caused someone harm. That's not just true for phones, it's true for tablets, it's true for laptops, it's true for pretty much any device, electronic device. We don't have anything in place to allow for equal, equitable, and safe production of these materials to this day. Something's got to change. On the other side of things, after we produce, once we're finished using these items, we also send things right back to China. So China excavates its land, harms its lands and people to give us these very valued minerals, and we send waste back in reply. It's kind of messed up. So the United States produces about 20 to 50 million tons of e-waste, that's just electronic waste, per year. And a lot of it gets sent out of the country, primarily to China, but also to India and parts of West Africa. This creates eco hazards because a lot of these components have heavy metals like cadmium, right, which will leach into groundwater. Heavy metals love to move around environments, so they really can cause far spread damage. And it creates dangerous jobs because now you have e-waste landfills, piles and piles and piles of just computers, electronic waste, wires, and other components that aren't refurbished and reused. And so people go through to collect the metals like copper, to reuse them, to find components that are still working, and they're exposed to all of these harsh chemicals over and over and over again. And this results in miscarriages, a high incidence of cancer, neurological damage, and learning deficits in the people that really don't have another option but to work in these jobs because that's all that's near them physically. So it's compounding into a very serious and grave, complex problem. So what can we actually do about this, right? How can we actually change this? If we continue as it is, we're going to put pressure on our ecosystem. We're going to continue putting pressure on greenhouse gas management. We're not going to be able to do that as well. And we're going to damage humans in the process, right? And we are doing this. So what can we do to get out of this pattern? Simply put, climate change is the most important issue of our lifetime. We don't have the luxury anymore of thinking outside of climate change. We simply cannot do it. There is nothing that you should be doing at this point that should be separate from climate change. How you study, what your interests are, you should be at the very least thinking about how that can contribute to improving impacts on climate change. If you think about your career, same thing. If you think about your daily life, same thing. How can we improve the impacts that lead to climate change? So, how can anything we do make an impact? Fortunately, we are in a really great position. We are the developers, we are the designers, we are the creators, we are the ones who actually get to say what's important. Where's the market going to go? What's going to be the hot new thing? It comes from us, it comes here. So we have a chance to really dictate what is actually cool, what are things that we want to collect, what are things we want to have around us. So we're going to talk about how we can embed sustainable practices everywhere, not just in what we like to do, not just when we're watching Planet Earth, but all of the time. So let's talk about some sustainable practices. I'm going to keep this as straightforward as I possibly can, and we're just going to talk about 5 things that you can do, and they're going to be easy to remember because we've been hearing about them our whole lives. I like this quote from David Attenborough: "Don't waste anything. Don't waste electricity, don't waste food, don't waste power." I think if you keep this logic in mind, if you think as much as you can about how you can minimize waste, you will make profound and far-reaching impacts as to what happens in the ecological and social world around you. I'll talk about why. So, again, the majority of the greenhouse gases that are produced are coming from things that we interact with. We're the ones that create the demands for raw materials. We're the ones who are using fossil fuels to use our energy, right, to keep our houses lit and warm. We are the ones who are buying these products that are potentially using greenhouse gases, and we are the ones in charge of waste management, right? But there's a lot of places for us to work. We also have the earth working on our side already, so we can use this to our advantage. National parks, land preservation, etc., basically knocks out 12% of the greenhouse gas emission per year, right? So we're really looking at 88% of greenhouse gas emission that we want to reduce. So we're already starting at less than everything. Great. So we can make changes to waste management, raw material demand, and the demand for fossil fuels for use of energy. Fortunately, Colorado, if you guys, I'm assuming not everyone here is going to be from Colorado, but Colorado has some really great initiatives to actually get off of fossil fuels, and I'm happy to chat about them afterward if you guys have questions. All right, 5 steps for sustainability. It's a lot of R words. First of all, research. Don't just go out and knee jerk and buy and throw things away. Find out what's going on around you. What are waste management resources near you? This is interactive, so you guys are going to do some Googling. Or binging. Do people still bing? I don't know. Anyway, so we can try some searches. So no matter where you are, if you're moving, if you're going to a new location, you should do this every time you move to get familiar with what your resources and options are around you. You could type in sustainable waste management or eco waste management and the name of your location. So that could be Colorado, that could be Boulder, that could be the United States, and you'll get better off to be more local, right? So maybe your town, but you'll get an idea of what resources are around to help for sustainable waste management. Zero waste is also a trend. This is really what we're leaning toward, and really what, as a society, we should be emphasizing and celebrating a zero waste mindset. So if you search for zero waste and, again, your location, you might find some things. So go ahead and do that. Try a couple of these searches, and then drop some places that are around, either on campus or in your town, in your state, that allow for or help with sustainable waste management. What you guys coming up with? Electronics e-cycle, nice. Yeah, Boulder County has a zero waste initiative, which is awesome. Cool. I like seeing that. Resource Central, my second home. Resource Central is a place where you can find reusable items and a lot of reused raw materials, or raw materials for reuse, I should say. Cool. I think that gives us a good idea. So great. So now you also have this now in your search history, which means it will influence the kind of things that come up in your ads and your future searches. Ha ha ha. All right. Another thing to research is where you get your materials. Where do you order your things? Where do you get your supplies? And are these places ethical? Are they doing their best to actually be sustainable? So primarily you want to look for local green businesses. As much as you can purchase in person, do that, because the cost of shipping and the eco footprint of sending things by air to get across to, especially out of country, is really, really, really huge. It adds up quickly. So the more you shop locally, the more of an impact that you have. And we also vote with our dollars, right? We have a really big influence on how companies behave based on who we use. So these are all companies on the right that are based out of Washington State. So Microsoft, Packer, Starbucks, Costco, and Amazon. And the nonprofit group had done just a report on how well they reduced their carbon emissions. And Amazon is terrible. They set forth, you've probably seen the commercials, to go carbon neutral by 2030 or 2050, but they have no plan to actually do it. They set the carbon neutrality goal into play in 2018 and saw a 15% increase in carbon footprint, carbon offsets the next year, because they weren't anticipating an increase in sales. Now, with 2020 and everybody at home and ordering, it's probably going to be a much higher increase again this year. So they're not actually on track to do anything to meet the goals that they put forward. But they are making a lot of commercials about it, so I guess that's something. And then another thing you want to research is whether you need that item to be new. Do you actually need a brand new version of something, or can you buy a refurbished, reused, or resold version of that? Step 2, reduce, right? The first thing you should do is find ways to minimize the amount of plastic waste and waste in general that you're producing, right? So having a water bottle is great, saying no to offers of plastic water bottles as much as you can, not using single-use plastics, etc., right? So choose less packaging. This also comes in when you're shopping online. Get as much combined shipping as you can. Maybe you keep a cart open and you accrue items over a little while, and then once you kind of reach a maximum, then you ship your order. instead of ordering many, many, many times. And then try again to buy locally. Buy locally, just buy locally. And then buy it to keep it. Try not to buy single-use plastics. I am a firm believer that we should have a ban, just like Canada does. And don't go running to buy the hot new thing because it's the hot new thing, right? Don't go quickly to buy a PS5. You don't really need it. And the whole thing behind these, whenever you see like, oh, this is coming out, the new iPhone is coming, and there's all this hype around it, it's basically luring you into purchasing without thinking about whether you need it or not. And then you don't think about what you do with the device that you already have. Great, you got a PS5. What are you doing with your PS4? Right? So don't buy into that part of consumerism where you're just reflex knee-jerk buying the hot new thing. Instead, think of replacing your items, think of breaking your items down into usable components. We're all makers and hackers here, so there's going to be a lot of cool uses for the old items that you have. I'm sure a lot of you guys are hanging out to your old phones. I have no doubt. All right, build things, fix things. iFixit is awesome. 3, reuse. We're kind of getting into familiar territory here. So reduce first and then reuse materials as much as you possibly can. When you're creating and when you're prototyping, plan to reuse parts. So make a prototype that can be easily disassembled and easily have parts that can be used again. So using breadboards, for example, over making lots and lots of different soldered boards to start. Use recyclable materials, using cardboard, paper mock-ups before you use the more hard to process and recycle materials like PLA, which is used in 3D printing, right? And especially try to use rare earth elements. There's not much that we could do as individual consumers there, but I do want to talk about some cool stuff that's happening in this aspect. So Critical Materials Institute is a part of the EPA, and they have a $200 million research budget for 5 years to create designs to make your electronic devices reusable, harvestable, recyclable. So your phones will be designed to come apart, so maybe the screen comes off easily and you could use it in another version of the phone. You could tear apart, getting down to the semiconductors and transistors that are on your chips inside of your phone. All of those things are being designed to get to be removed from phones more easily. Right now, it takes more energy to get the rare earth minerals from a phone or a laptop than it is to get it from the earth. And we need to change that given how much that is damaging the planet and the people. Colorado is doing its part by opened up a plant, a rare earth processing plant in June of last year. And this plant is equipped to separate and recycle rare earth elements. So in a few years, I would imagine that we're going to see Colorado taking on a lot of that onus and responsibility of recycling rare earth elements and easing our need to have that very climate change producing influx from China. Step 4 is to repair, right? So before we think of throwing things away, we should think about how we can fix them. This kind of comes back to thinking about things as a sum of their parts. This isn't a broken iPhone, this is a broken screen, right? And so fixing things is almost always cheaper. OIT is a great group of people, and they might not be able to fix your phone for you, but they certainly will point you in the right direction and give you resources and possibly even lend you tools to do so. You'd be surprised how much people are looking to accommodate people who are trying to fix and repair their devices. Cell phone providers and stores like Best Buy offer repairs, which will be cheaper than buying the whole product, even though it will be expensive. I've been there. And then independent repair services generally are cheaper than any mainstream kind of Best Buy-like store. You could take workshops to learn how to build different tools, and the more you know how to build, the more you know how to destroy. So the BTU Lab and Building 61 offer workshops of various sorts and are both worth following and just checking on regularly to see what workshops are there so you can learn how to repair your devices. There's also tons and tons and tons of YouTube videos. You could do anything through YouTube these days. Think of components again as, think of your items again as their components, right? And then step 5 is recycle, and recycle responsibly, which you guys are already doing. And I loved seeing that. So in the quiz, most of you guys are rinsing, which is awesome. So if you're recycling your plastics, make sure that you rinse them first. When you're recycling paper and cardboard, they have to be dry and clean. So dirty pizza boxes, can't recycle it. But if you there's certain companies that have like that material on the inside where you can throw away the material and then you can recycle the cardboard box. But it's going to vary by where you are, of course. And then properly sort your recycling. It's really easy to get frustrated and to get lackadaisical about where we're putting things, what bins they're going in. We're a little bit spoiled in Boulder where we could just throw everything in at once, but that's not always the case. So take the dedicated time to sort your recycling and make it easy on yourself. Get different bins for all the different types of recycling you do. Bring hard to recycle and recycled material to recycle centers. So these are things like styrofoam, plastic film, and fabrics. So these things really shouldn't end up in the trash. They shouldn't go to the landfill. There are places where you could take these, usually where you can find e-waste management or where you can find hard to recycle and hard to dispose of material management as well. So again, getting on that search engine and finding what's available around you will help. And then wherever you can, and again, this is becoming more and more of a systematic, structured thing, compost food waste. Basically try to get less waste, less stuff in your trash bin. So there are 5 steps to improving your eco-responsibility, and they all really center around how you use materials. First, research, know what's going on around you, what resources you have available. Second, reduce the waste products when you're shopping. So if you can't recycle it, don't buy it. 3, reuse your materials, especially parts of materials. So keep those old phones and take them apart for whatever crazy designs you guys have going on. Repair, repair, repair. Repair your tools, repair your devices, sew your clothes. Try to hang on to things as long as you possibly can. That's the game. And then finally, when you can't do any of these 4 things, so it's all of these things first, and then the last resort is waste. So it's thinking about how we can use things well, and then when we can't think of that anymore, that's when we recycle and we do so responsibly. Sorry, I didn't mean to shock you there. All right, so I want to close out here by just giving a couple of quick ideas for how we can instill the value in these in sustainability problems. How do we make this something we think about naturally and incorporate into our lives? First things first, help others manage waste, right? So there's a lot of things. I'm thinking a lot about T9 hacks. I'm thinking a lot about what you guys are going to produce. I'm just going to throw some ideas out there. If it sticks, it sticks. Maybe you make an app that helps people figure out where certain waste materials go. They take a picture of a carton and it tells you what it is. There are a couple of apps out there that do something similar. So you could do a little bit of recon and see how you can improve on those ideas that are already out there. You can inform people of where they can find stores that offer bulk, which allows people to reduce waste. You're not buying as much packaging. Finding recycling and refurbish services, right? So basically like an offer up, but for tech tools, when you don't have a fully working phone, but you know some components of it works, you can swap it out with somebody who really, really loves to work with that kind of stuff. There's plenty of those people around. Maybe you're informing people of what the local waste practices are, right? It's GPS based. And so when you're in a new city, you can learn about here's how you get rid of the recycling. Here's how you get rid of trash. This city has compost. So when you're at your Airbnb, you could use this. Supporting companies that are working on redesigning these rare earth using components, right? So doing the research for people and then saying, hey, these are really cool companies that are doing something. They're probably going to see a huge boom in stock. So maybe you're going down an investment route, right? So as we're looking at how we reuse rare earth elements, we're also looking at where the market is likely to go. Maybe you make an app that provides a network of reusable supplies or a digital tool library or tool sharing. So if you, everyone that's in a virtual community can share their tools, can share some supplies that they have, what have you. And then another thing to another avenue is looking at people's behaviors. So how can we help people realize how much of an impact they're having on the world around them? So maybe you're tracking how much time you spend in a car, or the rate of your purchasing of tech or electronic devices. Maybe you find a way to track how people use single-use plastics by doing some sort of evaluation of companies, food services, food providers like I don't know, Applebee's. I'm reaching here. How so if you order to go from Applebee's, how likely are they going to give a single-use item? And so how often do you order from Applebee's, et cetera? So you start to build these tools that help people track how much they're consuming. What about an app that tells you how many pounds of rare earth metals are in your house? That could be cool, a fun thing that's just fun to think about and good to be aware of. And maybe you guys are hosting eco competitions. I kind of think of what Boulder does, where you scrape the waste, all of your extra food in the dining halls, and you see how much food waste accumulates. Maybe you do a virtual version of that, or maybe you do a competition where you see how little waste people can produce. And those are just a couple ideas to really think about. But I wanted to close by just saying we're so fortunate to live in this amazing, amazing planet. And if it's difficult and it's hard and there's all these changes to habit that are hard to ingrain, but when you think about what the reward is, when you think about what you're protecting, when you think about what's to come, it's worth it. I mean, look at that's a sloth swimming. That's so cool. And that happens here. And we live here. Let's make sure that this happens. And let's make sure the next generation of kids get to know this wonder as well. And thinking about how we move forward, I like to think that it's important to remember that it takes energy to produce light. So it takes energy to make our future something worth living, to make our future bright. And that's all I have for you today. Thank you guys so much for your attention and for your bearing with me with my tech problems. I'm Dr. Z. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram. My handle is @the_Dr.Z. And I'm happy to answer any questions and chat a little bit if you guys have the time. Thank you so much.